Hello friends and welcome to Pro Tools Answers, where 3 certified Pro Tools experts discuss, demonstrate and elaborate on your Pro Tools questions put to the community in the official Avid Facebook support forum. I'm your host, Dave Phillips, audio engineer and lecturer based in the UK, and on the show today we're tackling a question by Ephraim, who asks, is there anyone who can help me record Guitar Rig 5 Pro in Pro Tools? The instrument track is unable to record. Thus, the title of today's show is Nailing Electric Guitar Recording in Pro Tools. And helping me to answer Ephraim's question is the cream of audio engineering expertise, some of it curdled. We have Anders Motz from Tonkraftwerk in Austria.
Hello.
And master of all instructors, Andy Hageman, certifier of the certified and audio curriculum manager for Avid over in Tokyo. Konnichiwa, Andy.
Konbanwa.
So there's a couple of things that we can discuss today with Ephraim's question. So the first thing to deal with, Ephraim is trying to record electric guitar, real electric guitar by the sounds of it, which is something we don't see a lot of in modern music, real electric guitar. He's trying to record real electric guitar with an instrument track. So is this something that you guys come up a lot in your classes? Because it certainly pops up at least once a term for me. Is I get a question, why can't I record on this instrument track? I'm trying to record a bass or something. Do you get this as well?
I've not had it in years, I think, but I mean, the word sounds like you could record instruments to it, right? So
it makes sense.
I can understand that someone not being familiar with Pro Tools and its base functions or fundamental functions would interpret it wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know it. Sorry, Andy, go on.
No, you know it's one of those things. Is you get inside your own head after years and years of using Pro Tools and teaching it, and I have the luxury of teaching teachers, and so this usually doesn't come up. But it's the sort of rational, completely reasonable assumption that somebody might make, and it just happens to be completely wrong, right? You look at it as like, oh, of course, how can you not know that an audio track is what you record to? Easy, because it's called instrument, and I'm playing an instrument, and I'm using an instrument input. Why am I not using an instrument track? So it's one of those things that if we were in their shoes, might do exactly the same thing. That being said, an instrument track is a sibling of a MIDI track, so it's not meant for audio at all. It's all about MIDI.
Indeed. And the fact that there's an I/O section here that allows you to connect your inputs and it outputs directly to the outputs, and a MIDI track doesn't have either of those. It has MIDI connections. So that kind of further adds to the confusion, I always feel.
Sure.
But as Andy rightly said, if we drop down the playlist view selector here, we can't see anything to do with waveforms as we can do with our regular audio tracks. Everything that we see up here, this is to do with the MIDI portion of the instrument track. And because the instrument track amalgamates a MIDI track and an auxiliary track together, we've got the audio, the output portion down here that just deals with the audio routing side of the instrument track. But the basics is that the instrument track just records MIDI, it doesn't record audio.
Yeah, and you kind of skipped over something that's the key of the whole thing. Is a MIDI track records MIDI, right? That's all it does. Mm-hmm. An instrument track is the combination of a MIDI track and an auxiliary input track. Mm-hmm. So it has some audio functionality, but it can take audio and then move it on to somewhere else. It's not where you would record audio. The recording part of it, that's all MIDI.
And if you want to know more about instrument tracks and MIDI tracks and how you can use them, we did a show. It was a fairly early one, and I'm sure they will put a link to that video right up in that corner or somewhere. It should be somewhere on your screen right now. So that's the link to the instrument tracks. There you go, Dave.
I think we need about 520 more subscribers before that will happen.
No, Dave, you can do it. You can do it, Dave. If you don't, I will.
I'm clever, but I'm not that clever.
Okay, I will manage that. I will make sure there will be a link somewhere to that video.
Awesome.
And watch that if you want to know more about the instrument tracks. But let's talk about how to record a real guitar in Pro Tools.
Yes, so this is how to do it. So there are actually a couple of ways that we can do this in Pro Tools. The very basic thing is that if we're recording real audio, we're recording real instruments, and therefore the input signal is going to be sampled. It has to be recorded to an audio track. And typically we're plugging in a guitar which has one cable, so we're going to be recording to a mono audio track. Some guitars can output in stereo. If you're a Rickenbacker player, then you can record out in stereo, but we're going to be working in the mono realm to date. So the very basics is that we can just record a guitar to a mono audio track. And this will be as simple as it gets. Now, if we just hit record on this track, we've got a guitar plugged straight in, but it just sounds like a basic DI'd guitar. There's nothing particularly special about it. Guitarists, a big part of our sound is in the amplifiers, and what part of Ephraim's question was, how can I record using Guitar Rig Pro 5? Now, I'm not going to use Guitar Rig because I don't know about you, but I'm not a big fan of it. So I have a copy of Amplitube here.
Andy, are you telling him, or am I telling him that he's not sharing his screen again?
I've just given up.
Okay. Thank you, Dave.
I'm picturing it in my mind.
Okay, so let's find ourselves a nice, basic clean amp. That one all the way down as well. Something a bit cleaner. There we go. So we can do a little bit of sound design in the plugin itself. We'll hit record. So something nice and simple. And if we hit playback now, let's just solo this, we'll play it back. So that's the recording of my guitar, and it's being played back in real time through Amplitube. Now if I bypass that, we can hear the difference. So one of the big advantages of doing it this way is that after we've made the recording, we can do anything to this sound. We can change to different amplifiers, we can add effects, we can do anything. We can do any kind of sound design to this thing. So we don't have to commit our guitar sound to the audio track.
So basically, you recorded the unedited audio from the guitar directly to the audio track, and on the insert you have the guitar amplification simulation, or what you should call it. So you can always go back to the original recording, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so we can run it through a plugin. We can change to a different plugin if we want. If we don't like the sound of Amplitube, we can go over to SansAmp, which is given away free. We can flick over to 11. If we want a slightly different flavor. So you've got full control over your sound after you've done the recording. It's a really cool way of doing it. And would you say it's a very modern way of recording guitar these days?
I would. There are a couple of downsides that you should be aware of. Is whenever you're running through a plugin, and I'm not talking about recording through a plugin, I'm talking about the signal is being recorded to your hard drive dry, as you guys mentioned. But when it's being played back in your monitoring in your headphones, it's then going through that guitar amp and being processed. That can take time. And depending upon how your system's set up, that latency can impact what you're hearing in your headphone mix, which can destroy a mood, right? If you get just a little bit too much latency, that everything can fall apart. I'll say that if I have the equipment, if I've got the space to do it, I always like to have the guitar player play with a guitar amp in the room, and that be what they listen to and what they feel, because then that it's going to be as responsive as a real guitar amp, because it's a real guitar amp. And then you just record dry into that track, and you record wet. You record what comes out of the guitar amp as well. And that's, I think, where you're going to go to next, right?
Yeah, it is, because one of the things that you notice with an audio file like this is that it's ultra transient. So what we can see here is a really nice transient guitar recording. Now, if I actually committed this to tape, we're going to see what the signal would sound like if it was being recorded through
save both of those, right? So when you commit it, save the original track.
Yes, okay. So we'll see what our transients look like after this has been, if it had been recorded through a guitar amp. So we'll keep both of those. There we go. Because where recording like this can be a real advantage, and even if you're recording in the way that Andy is talking about, which is the way that you'd record in most professional studios, to be fair. You've got a guitar player. We love our guitar amps. We love our setups. A big part of our sound is in our equipment, isn't it? And you'd be hard pushed to be able to separate a guitar player from that. So if you're recording a real life guitar, we'd endeavor to try and take a DI input as well, because we get something like this. The differences between the transient response from the DI'd guitar and the amplifier itself is stark. So when it comes to editing, it can be a lot harder to edit guitar and for Pro Tools to get hold of the transients on a recording where there's all of that harmonic extra information.
Yeah, because what a lot of people don't realize is that distortion is a form of compression, right? It's actually a compressed signal coming out of the amplifier.
Yeah, indeed. So it's not necessarily problematic when we're up here. It's not problematic there. But when we look at the difference between these two tracks here, we want to edit that transient, no problem. But what happens when we want to get to that transient there? It's very unapparent where that particular note is in the amp track. So Pro Tools is able to latch onto it, which is quite nice, but it wasn't particularly able to latch onto that transient. So being able to record a DI version makes a massive advantage, because if we group these two together, and we'll just flip over to any kind of elastic audio mode. See if it flicks over into warp view together. There we go. So let me just do a little bit of editing to this transient here. We can see that they both move in concert with each other. Very difficult to find that transient if we were looking for it in the guitar amp recording.
Yeah, and you're left with another advantage, because we talked about this before the show, and this is something that I regularly do as well when I'm recording guitarist. I record the amp with one or two microphones, and I split off the signal before the amp to get the clean signal into Pro Tools. And I usually use two different amps then and hard pan them left and right. And this is something you can do now as well. You could have pan two different amplifications left and right to create an even bigger guitar image that leaves a hole in the middle of the stereo field where you typically want kick, snares and vocals. So it gets it out of the way a bit.
I have a track that might work for this demonstration of how that works. Let's find out. Let's find out together.
If you don't have it, I have one.
Oh, okay. Well, I can go either way.
Oh, you go ahead.
All right. Oh, fine. Throw me under the bus.
Who wants to show off more?
Anders.
Okay, I'm playing mine now.
No. So I've got a guitar, and if you take a look over here, it's pretty basic stuff. It is edited. So if we go over here. So it's low, it's boring, and it's not something I want to have in the center of the window or center of the stereo image. And I could show this anywhere, but I'll show it here. Fine. Here's the trick, and this is one of those things that can make your workflow a little bit easier. I need to make this mono track a stereo track, and people will go through flips and twists to do this. Like they'll double it and then they'll create a new track. But there's actually kind of a cheat. So if you go in here to your plugins and you go to something like, I don't know. You'll see here that I've got a number of different plugins. They all say mono, except for one. It says mono to stereo. And there's a bunch of different ones out there. So you've got over here, mono stereo. You've got a bunch of different mono to stereo plugins. Now what I'm going to do is I'll just choose this one. I'll choose Ozone 9 Elements. And I'm not using it.
You're right, you're not.
I'm not using it. I need to authorize that. So we'll go to something else. Although, strangely enough, it did the trick. I'll go to, let's go to something, pitch shift. Great. Now, I'm not even going to pitch shift it. In fact, I'm going to bypass it. But what it does is from this point on, from this insert on, it's now a 2-channel path, even though it's on a mono track. And you'll see here that it changed from 1 meter to 2 meters.
And now we have 2 panners as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And now you have 2 panners. So if you go over here, you're going to see now I have 2 panners. So is it still a mono track? Yes, it is. But now the signal has become kind of a stereo signal from this insert on. All right. So any insert before that would be processing a single channel. This is going to process 2. And I'm going to go over here to one of my favorites. I love 11 rack because I can make it sound really, really dirty, but there's nothing to beat the utilitarian use of SansAmp. SansAmp is just ridiculously easy. Now, if you take a look at this plugin, this is a multi-channel plugin, and anything I do on this multi-channel plugin will affect both the left and right sides. So I don't want to do this. I'm not going to choose a multi-channel plugin. What I'm going to do is I'm going to choose its multi-mono version. So I'm going to go here to harmonic. I'll go back to SansAmp. Where are you?
There it is. Yep.
And you'll see the difference right over here. You're going to see that I've got this little linkage area in the plugin, and I'm going to unlink it. And I'm going to choose, I don't know. Let's go to the settings, and I'll go to Jimi Hendrix in the left side, and then if I change this over to right, I'll go back up here and I'll choose something else. I'll go to Stevie Ray. Done. Okay. Now what you're going to get is, well, we don't know because I've never tried this before with this part. So this is great broadcasting right here. But let's find out. Yeah. Now at this point, very little of that signal is residing in the center. I've really spread it out, and you don't want to have radically different things. You could hear. Now, it's very spread. It's not, however, going to be necessarily phase canceling. So just for fun, let's see how phase canceling this is. And this is something you might want to check if you're doing something. So if I go to down mixer and I change this to mono, let's see. So it is mono compatible. And what I'll do here is I'll just go ahead and remove this. And I've got this difference. Now, I didn't know what I would get when I down mixed, right? When I put it down to mono. Always, if you're going to do this kind of thing, always check it, because you can wind up with some pretty significant phase cancellation if you put them together, which might be something you can live with, but it might be something that you don't want to live with, depending upon how important mono compatibility is to you.
Yeah, that's a great workflow, Andy. I actually have not done exactly that before, and I thank you for that. I will totally steal that workful from you. So what I usually
it's called the Hagerman technique.
Yeah,
just tell
what I usually do is a similar technique, but I go the extra length here. You can see here that I have a guitar here, and I've just doubled the track. And on these two power guitars left and right here, if we look into the mix window, basically I have the Sans amp on one of them on the left, and it's hard panned left, and on the other one I have the 11, which has a totally different tone and sound. And I'm not as fussy as you are. Like mine are pretty different the way they sound. If we listen to them at once, they will sound something like this. It will take a couple of seconds for it to start playing, but and I really love the way that these two will create a wall of sound and sound pretty different in different speakers. And that's something I use a lot, but I will totally steal your thunder there, or not steal your technique. I mean, what you could do is also, you could actually do them on one of the tracks. You could have a mono track and just use the Sans amp for the left side, and then you could insert the 11 and just use the right side, right?
Yeah, because if you multi-mono it, you can bypass one side of it.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Never thought about that.
There you go.
So,
but do this. I mean, this is one of the things that you can fall into anytime you do any of these extreme panning things. You do potentially flirt with the risk of not having a mono version of your mix sound that good, right? Because
Totally, yeah.
Because of what the very thing that makes it sound so extreme might make it not combine well. Might, not necessarily will, but that's why that down mixer plugin is worth its weight in gold, to check things, right? To make sure that what you think is going to happen will actually happen when you sum it down to mono, if that's what you know.
If that's your goal, yeah. I mean, some people have really elaborate panning schemes. I tend to have 3 positions. I'm center, left, or right. That's it for me. When I'm doing pop and rock.
he's a complex but simple guy.
Actually, his panning is just a checkbox. Center.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think we can level up Andy's technique here, right? And something that Andy was talking about earlier on was that having a real guitar amp in the room. And as I said, guitar players, we're quite precious about our stuff and our sounds. But if you're a guitar player that doesn't have the resources to be able to have beautiful sounding amps to record live in the room with, we could fake this in Pro Tools. You could build yourself a beautiful sounding rig in Pro Tools, and that's combine a little bit of what we were talking about before. So, look what just happened.
Oh my goodness.
There's an ice cream man who's just driving round and round and round my street at the moment. Have you heard it? It's like 3 times. I swear to God.
Ice cream! Ice cream! The ice cream man is coming! The ice cream man is coming!
So let's start off with, let's go to a auxiliary track, because if we were recording with a real guitar amp, we'd be recording directly to tape, wouldn't we? We'd be committing what we're recording. So we'll call our auxiliary, we'll call it amp, and then we'll stick, and it's a stereo amp, I know that, stereo track. We're going to stick Amplitube on it. So, as Andy was talking about, let's decouple our amps. Let's go and look for that nice Soldano head again.
You've got too many amps.
Said no guitar player ever. Actually, no, let's just, for ease, let's go for orange. So we'll select this orange amp on the left channel. We'll get another amp on the right channel, and we'll just stick an American Vintage on there specifically for Andy. So we've got 2 American Vintages on the show. Oh! So let's flick over. So just remind us, we've got an orange on the left, and we've got a Fender Blackface on the right. So doing exactly what Andy's done, and Anders too. We've got two different amps on the left hand and the right, so we should get ourselves a nice wide sounding stereo recording. The problem is that we can't record directly in to this auxiliary track because we've got a guitar with one cable. We can't plug that into two. So we're going to hack the signal flow a little bit. We're going to create a mono auxiliary. We're going to set that to be my input for the guitar. There we go. And we're going to output that to my amp track. So now we're playing in mono, but we're going into the guitar amp in stereo. And we can build ourselves a lovely sounding guitar rig, stereo guitar rig in here. Notice no latency whatsoever, which is quite nice. And we're going to then route that to an audio track and commit it to an audio track. And we'll call that guitar. Let's actually name that as guitar in. And we're going to route this. This is a long way round of doing it, I agree.
Well, while you're doing this, what Dave is showing is a version of a kind of workflow, and you might hear this term thrown around. It's called inline console. And basically what the idea of this is to record into an aux track. That's taking your source, and then you put your processes on there, your EQs, your reverbs, whatever, anything, right? And then you output that to an audio track, and your audio track basically is going to be recorded with all of those processes. I'm trying not to use the word committed because commit is a feature, but it'll be recorded with those processes for good, right? It's not something you can undo at that point. You're actually recording to disk with the processes. And obviously this is an older technique. This is because in the old days you didn't have that many effects, and you would want to record to tape with your effects applied permanently.
Well, we can just axe the effects completely if that is a valid thing, because once you've committed these effects to tape, you can't get rid of them. I don't think there's no verb on there whatsoever. But what we could do is, if you want to record with effects, let's just create ourselves a pair of effects channels for verb and delay.
I'll be right back.
We have delay, we have reverb, but they're not being recorded in real time. They're being sent in real time, but they're not being recorded. So we can still record using effects, but we're not committing anything actually to tape. So let's just bring that delay right down. Okay, so So there we go. So we printed our guitar amp, recorded in mono, but we printed it in stereo on the track itself. So great way of, for my money anyway, if you don't have the money or the resources to be able to get hold of amps of this ilk, and Amplitube actually have some really nice, IK actually have some really nice amp models that you can buy for not a lot of money. So you can build yourself a really nice rig inside the door. And in fact, I work with players who do have amp racks that they use on stage built inside Amplitube.
By the way, just as kind of a little tiny workflow hack, I noticed that when you went into Amplitube, you were switching between the left and right sides, and so you can never really see them at the same time. Sometimes that can be a little bit of a pain. One of the things you can do is you can hold down Power Claw, which is Control Option Command, or Control Alt Start, depending upon whether you're on a Mac or a Windows, and then click on either the L or R, depending upon what you're seeing there. And what will happen is it will open up one window per channel. So at that point, you can see, and you'll see that this vintage American one is the R channel, and you can see that it's got that little R by it. So it just gives you another way of viewing. It does take a little bit more real estate, but it does, when you want to, give you the ability to adjust both parameters, without leaving windows. And
right.
around.
It is worth mentioning that newer versions of Amplitube, you can build bigger rigs in these, but this is the free version. It requires you to purchase the software to be able to build bigger stuff. But I don't think we had that in other versions of Amplitube, and it may not be available in other amp sims anyway. So this is a workflow that will work for a number of different amp sims and not just Amplitube.
Now, obviously, another way that you could do that is you can freeze tracks and commit. So I mean, it all comes down to what workflow that you're working for. I got a question. Since we're on the landing approach of the show, what guitar amp simulation is your go-to?
For me, I'm a Kemper player, so I don't tend to use them. I have everything built into my Kemper profiling amp. But before that, it would be Amplitube.
I love the Sans amp and 11. I use them a lot. Even though I have other alternatives, I really love
I can't get away from Sans amp. I keep wanting to try something else, and I wind up going to Sans amp. One of the things I do like about 11, and it's a goofy feature, but it can give you some great results, is if you take a look at 11, and let me see, I'll go ahead and share my screen. One of the features that it just tickles me that they put this in here. So one of the features that I just love to death is this one down at the bottom is speaker breakup. Basically, you can age the speaker so that it does all that nasty, random stuff that sometimes will basically make a performance just sound that much more realistic. And you also have, by the way, the different microphone choices that you can throw in here and put them on axis, off axis. I just think that this bottom section over here is for making a grungy kind of real simulation sound. It gets me, that's something that Sans amp and a lot of amp simulators don't have, and you usually have to add that kind of dirtiness later on an insert afterwards. Here it's actually built in, which is kind of nice. Yeah,
absolutely. I really love that section too, and I think it's just a great plugin. And going back to the Sans amp as well, I use it on guitars, but I always use it on bass as well. I love it on bass.
I use it on bass too. And the last thing I wanted to bring up is, I always make it a point of recording whatever the guitar player was using at the time. Now, if it's a virtual signal, then I make a note of what they did, of the amp that they chose. I put it in the comments. But if they're bringing an amp, which I personally I prefer, because it takes a lot of the guesswork out of their sound, so they know how to get the sound out of their amp, and so they drag it in and we record it. Two reasons. One is it's their sound, and it's going to sound just like they're used to playing, and they're going to play easier because they understand it. But secondly, it tells me what their concept of their sound is. So even if I don't wind up using that track, which is a 50-50 thing, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but I always kind of refer back to what their concept of sound is, so that I can, if I work around it, I can work knowing that I'm either adhering to what they were playing live, or going somewhere completely different, right? But I know I have a reference point of what they had in their heads, right? Which from a producer's perspective, not necessarily a Pro Tools thing specifically, but from a producer's perspective, it's always good to have an idea of what the client's vision originally is, so that you know when you're straying and when you're not.
Okay, so I think we've got to the crux of Ephraim's question there. Instrument track is not the right track to be recording real instruments onto, and we've given you guys a nice few different ways to consider recording guitar, not just recording it straight onto the audio track and then processing it afterwards, but actually considering committing and looking at some stereo techniques as well, and maybe even giving you guys who haven't got the ability to buy lots of Fender black faces and Soldano heads and stuff, being able to build some really good rigs inside your system and do some interesting signal flow stuff with them. So if you've enjoyed what we've been doing today, hit subscribe, and if you've enjoyed the video, hit like on that as well. All it leaves me to say is thank you very much to Anders.
Thank you.
Thank you to Andy.
You betcha.
My name's Dave. This is Pro Tools Answers. We'll see you next time, and we're out.